Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today's podcast we're going to discuss Ukraine and succinctly provide you with what we feel are the important updates, things that matter, and only the facts and the detail pertinent to that. Now, there's been a lot of discussion in the last day or so with regards to Kursk, because the Russian forces liberated over 100 square kilometers. They also retook 12 what are referred to as settlements in Kursk. And there seemed to be, for me, this misunderstanding that somehow Ukraine had capitulated and therefore on that basis, they're going to leave Ukraine soon, which is the case, of course. But the reasons why is not well understood. And it relates to developments that are happening a considerable distance away from Kursk. And that is the fact that Russian forces have now entered the territory of Dnipro region. This is during the ongoing battle for Pokrovsk, which of course is in the next People's Republic. So in regards to this area, the Ukrainian army are looking at retreating. They're trying to plant mines throughout the center of Pokrovsk, but the Ukraine command has actually abandoned the city and relocated its command centers to the Dnipro region. So why is this relevant to Kursk? Well, clearly they've been trying to plug gaps that have now exist in that region. They're looking for additional reinforcements, battalions. There are even more mercenaries entering that region from places like France, Britain, and Germany. As we know, Pokrovsk is a crucial logistics hub for Ukrainian forces in the Donetsk People's Republic. The loss of the city would be hugely symbolic in their ongoing battles that are still ensuing. But why, as I said, is Kursk related in any way, shape, or form to Pokrovsk? Well, it's because Ukraine has had to plug gaps in the Pokrovsk region because it's that critical from them to try and keep hold of that territory, that they've moved a number of brigades from Kursk region. Well, it's back to that old discussion. If you're trying to plug gaps somewhere, you're going to leave a gap somewhere else. So clearly, they've had to pull considerable forces out of Kursk, relocate them to Pokrovsk and the surrounding region, which is why suddenly Russia's made major advancements in Kursk, and whatever forces are now left in Kursk region, the Ukrainian ones, that is, there's rumors to be 10,000. There are a lot of cases and claims that they're totally surrounded, etc. By all accounts, that's incorrect. It doesn't mean they're not going to end up having to leave within the next few weeks, but that is the reason. It's not suddenly that Russia made some major advancement because of some tactical changes. It's just suddenly there was huge holes left in the Ukrainian defense in Kursk, and Russia was able to exploit it accordingly. So for us, that's as much as needs to be said operationally. As ever, I think there's far too much emphasis placed on these things. The war's long since won from Russia's perspective. More importantly now is the ongoing discussions to end the war and what that will mean in terms of territory that Russia controls in the future or doesn't control. Now, we know the United States has put enormous amounts of pressure on Ukraine since that ill-fated debacle that occurred in the Oval Office. They have stopped sharing intelligence with Ukraine, but not completely. And again, that's another misunderstanding. It was in relation to their ability to carry out strikes into Russian territory. They still provided them with other intelligence, whereby, therefore they could only prevent them from having access, to data, that therefore they could inflict damage on the territory of Russia itself. So essentially the US had prohibited also their allies from sharing what would be deemed time-sensitive and high-value US intelligence to construct strikes also on movable Russian targets. Clearly, they also wanted to restrict and have restricted other military and financial aid. But again, this is something that needed to be clarified because, unfortunately, there are people making claims out there that are incorrect. The other thing the United States most certainly did do is had talks with opposition groups. I think in a sense they were feeling them out to say, well, what's your feeling about a future Ukrainian government without Zelensky in office? Interestingly, the opposition groups came out after these discussions and said there's not going to be any elections while the war's going on. I think the United States were probing to feel, maybe there's enough internal desire at this point in time to see Zelensky no longer president, where we can force an election, because Zelensky almost certainly, of course, will lose that election. But when that didn't happen, clearly those discussions didn't go according to plan for the United States. And I think that's an avenue that's now of no value to either party. So it's very unlikely for the time being, at least, to, see those discussions begin to have any substance whatsoever going forward. And then we come on to the point with regards to this meeting in Riyadh between the United States and Ukraine. I think it's very telling that Zelensky is not party to that discussion. I think that's a very good idea. Given his outbursts in the Oval Office, the last thing they need is that to happen again. So the discussions will be between US officials and Ukrainian officials. Of course, Trump being Trump couldn't help but want to cheerlead these discussions by claiming there was going to be some major developments happening at these peace talks. And he said, we think then on that basis, because we're going to have some positive outcome, we can lift this pause on intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And Ukraine's going to do well out of this. Russia's going to do well out of this. And we're making all these deals clearly behind closed doors. Well, this will be, of course, news to Russia, because Russia and the United States have yet to have any discussions of any substance on the whole idea of how to end the war. This is initially a meeting to assess whether there's any point in continuing to have any meaningful discussions with the Ukrainians about how to start to develop a peace initiative leading to a peace agreement to end the war itself. Because, of course, Trump has frozen military aid. They did cut off, as we said, intelligence sharing to some degree. And the question, therefore, on that basis is, what are the Ukrainians prepared to concede to get this ball finally rolling? It doesn't mean it's that their negotiating position is going to be the outcome by any stretch of the imagination, because I can imagine they're going to walk in and offer very little, but it might be a little bit more than they did last time. Now, to preempt this meeting, Rubio and Waltz met with MBS, who's obviously his country which is hosting these peace talks. And they discussed efforts to reach a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Now, I would emphasize the fact they're just merely briefing MBS. He is not party to those discussions in the sense of what should be agreed and what shouldn't be agreed, because the point for Rubio and Waltz was to prep him prior to MBS meeting later on that same day with Zelensky, who was there to visit him only and not to be party to the negotiations today between Ukraine and the United States. So in essence, he meets with Zelensky, then he can go and talk to the Americans and say, well, okay, this is the feeling, this is what we're gauging from Zelensky at this point in time, who is now claiming he wants to be responsible and have productive talks, but he basically said that last time and it failed to materialize. So the Ukrainian delegation clearly is going to meet this US team today. Everyone's hoping there's going to be some positive outcome. Zelensky can say, well, we're going to be fully constructive, but words don't mean anything. Actions mean everything. So the question is, to what extent will Ukraine accept Russian control of territory as part of the peace deal, meaning basically Donetsk Lugansk, Zaporozhye, also, of course, Kherson and Crimea. Rubio's basically saying equally, look, Russia can't conquer all of Ukraine. Well, if the war went on long enough, of course they could, but that would be absurd because they don't want it anyway. It's going to be impossible for Ukraine, he said, Rubio, any reasonable time period to force the Russians back all the way to where they were in 2014. That's very diplomatically trying to suggest, well, it could happen, but it could take years, but it is not going to happen. And the Americans know it. The Russians know it. Ukrainians know it, but are they now prepared to admit it? I mean, but clearly Zelensky has had some discussions with White House officials in the last few days, and he now wants to sign this deal to give the US access to Ukraine's critical minerals. But again, at the last minute, is he going to demand security guarantees? If he does, the deal's off. Zelensky, of course, speaking with MBS, will clearly have made the right noises to him. Otherwise, I don't think there would have been any meeting today. So let's see if they are serious this time about ending the war and having a lasting peace settlement. Rubio said if they can get that ball rolling in a way that's actually meaningful, then Ukrainian military aid would be restored. So in essence, they're just trying to force his hand, Zelensky and his officials, to agree to get a peace process going. And if they do, they'll restore military aid and intelligence to the Ukrainians. Now, what's Kiev likely to do that's not going to fly? Well, there's talk they want to have a partial ceasefire with Russia related to long-range drone and missile strikes and combat operations in the Black Sea. Well, we know why, because Russia is totally dominant in those fields, and Ukraine really will gain a lot more from Russia not participating in using those drones, etc., than Ukraine will get if from Russia not doing it. Russia will gain from Ukraine not doing so because it's such a limited military operation from Kiev's perspective. They think that will help talks progress so the US will reverse its decision to not provide intelligence sharing and weapon supplies. As we know, and it's worth noting, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have had any form of direct negotiations. I mean, so we'll see. I mean, Trump talked to reporters on Air Force One, and, that the Ukrainians have to show them they mean what they are saying, not just saying it. I mean, and we're going to know in the next few days whether that is a reality or isn't. Clearly, this is something the Germans, the French, and the British, who still think they have some relevance, because they're going to talk to Ukraine's representatives saying, look, we're going to be committed to a lasting peace and support you. But in the next breath, they get on the phone, of course, to the Americans going, well, are you going to support us? Because if you don't, we can't possibly, on that basis, continue to support Ukraine. So this weekend coming, there's supposed to be this virtual meeting of some European countries talking again and trying to sound relevant, even though they're irrelevant, to securing a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Now, the Americans' perspective is they think there's some substance this time around. So if it isn't, they're going to be deeply embarrassed. But I think the US's main objective this time is get this critical minerals deal signed and then start to get some tentative kind of noises that Ukraine's prepared to agree to concessions, however vague that is. I mean, but the Americans, of course, will say they expect substantial progress, but what do they actually mean in that regard? But Zelensky apparently wants to sign this minerals deal now. What's changed? Well, probably not a lot. It's just the realization that if he doesn't show some willingness, some intent to end the war, then the United States will walk away in totality. And really, without US support, however limited that's been and will be in the future, it means the war literally ends, probably in a matter of weeks. Now, as well as considering the pressure the United States is putting on Ukraine, Russia can step up the pressure also. Now, there are a lot of suggestions that, in fact, Russia may start to accelerate the SMO if these talks in Riyadh turn out to be just irrelevant and a total waste of time. So what that involved? Well, probably stepping up even more than they already have done. So even though it's significant in destroying military and transport infrastructure, this could relate to, of course, railways, bridges, ammunition depots, maybe the energy grid, maybe try to shut down the power grid to parts of Ukraine rather than them being out of action for days, weeks. This could end up being indefinite. They may start to launch offensives in other areas. I think that's less likely. But Kharkov, they already have made some inroads there. It might involve Sumy, but they may also decide finally we've got the forces to do this. Maybe we can consider Nikolaev next. But Russia clearly is in a position to launch offensives in various directions because militarily they have the forces, they have the equipment, they have the capability, whereas, of course, Ukraine lacks all of those in abundance. Kharkov, people think, is something that's on Russia's radar. It's a big city. They could get bogged down in there for weeks. There is of no value, really, to take it at this point in time. If they did, of course, it would be a huge strategic victory. In terms of Nikolaev, well, clearly it's a center of industrial production, so there is some incentive to do that. Odessa, as we know, strategically is important as a port, but those two regions, of course, if Russia had control of it, would mean they had control over the whole Black Sea. So I think they would only continue to do that if all these discussions to end the war were completely and utterly futile. But certainly, if Russia continues to accelerate the SMO from their perspective, then there's going to be a lot more missile strikes and there's going to be a lot more precision bombing of facilities and any way to further weaken the Ukrainians. Of course, if the Ukrainians are completely intransigent, which hopefully they're not going to be, then very quickly Ukraine will face the challenges that are totally insurmountable because they will have absolutely no intelligence, no military aid. Europe basically has got nothing left to give. They would have huge logistical problems because they'd have no access to intelligence, to satellite technology. It is likely to cause huge instability in the country when people start to think we've got nothing to defend ourselves. It's one thing having this endless supply of Western weapons, money to keep the country going in a manner of speaking. But if that all vaporizes, then internal rest could follow also as a result of this. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact of the potential implications of what Russia could do by applying pressure also. And they may well have talked to the Americans and said, we're maybe in a position to do this. This may, in fact, act as a way of helping to end the war rather than accelerating the progress Russia is going to make or the intended targets. But again, let's see what the fallout is from this meeting that started a few hours ago in Riyadh between the US and the Ukrainian officials. The good thing is, from our perspective, Zelensky's nowhere near the meeting, and I think long may that continue, because I think he will just end up causing mayhem and the meeting will collapse and the United States would look deeply embarrassed. And I think they were furious enough last time. If it happens again, then it could be a point of no return, in which case there won't be any negotiations whatsoever. And the way the war will end was when effectively Russia decides the war ends and Ukraine has to surrender. And then there will be no negotiations. Russia will do what it wants, how it wants. And the United States will step back and say, well, you caused this. They've already warned them. If you don't start to play ball with regards to negotiations, then you're on your own. And everyone knows if Ukraine's on their own, there is no way they could last more than a few weeks. Europe can sit there and talk about what they're going to do or think they're going to do. But this is all pie in the sky as far as reality goes. And we'll talk about the European perspective in Ukraine in a future podcast. So with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support, which we greatly appreciate. Please like, share, and subscribe. We're trying to grow the channel, and we will provide Ukraine updates with concise, succinct information that you therefore fully understand what is important at this point in time, and you won't therefore be bombarded with a lot of facts that in reality offer nothing of any substance to understand what's currently going on. And with that, I'll say goodbye.